It was a chilly Wednesday evening in early October when it first happened. I was in my house on the north side of Chicago near Lincoln Square when I heard the doorbell ring. I hadn't ordered anything and I wasn't expecting any visitors. My first thought was that it was some kind of mistake. I opened the door to find a young guy in a red Grubhub jacket holding a large paper bag. His face was partially hidden behind a cloth face mask, but I could see his friendly eyes as he greeted me. "Food delivery for you," he said, handing me the bag. "I didn't order any food," I replied, confused. "This is the address," he insisted, showing me his phone. Indeed, it had my name and address on it, clear as day. After a moment of hesitation, I accepted the bag, thinking perhaps one of my friends had sent it as a surprise. The driver nodded and left without another word. I brought the bag inside and placed it on the kitchen counter. Opening it, I found an assortment of dishes from a local Thai restaurant called Sticky Rice, which I loved. Despite my initial hesitation, the aroma was tempting. Maybe it was a mix-up, but since it was here, I decided to enjoy it. The next evening, around the same time, the doorbell rang again. I was working on my laptop, finishing up some reports for my job at a local marketing firm. The interruption startled me, and I went to answer the door, wondering if it could be another unexpected delivery. To my surprise, it was the same Grubhub driver holding another bag of food. "Food delivery for you?" he repeated, extending the bag towards me. "This has to be a mistake," I said, feeling a little uncomfortable at this point. "I didn't order anything." He just shrugged. "This is the address on the order," he replied. I took the bag reluctantly. "Who's ordering this?" I asked, trying to get more information. "I'm just the driver," he said, then turned and walked away before I could ask any more questions. This time, the food was from Pequod's Pizza, a popular spot in Lincoln Park. Again, it was a meal I loved, which made the situation even stranger. I felt a chill run down the back of my neck. Someone knew my tastes and was sending me food, but who? That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of the growing anxiety. I decided to check the security cameras I had installed around my house. Living in the city, I'd always felt safer with them in place. I rewound the footage to the time of the delivery and watched as the driver approached my door, dropped off the food, and then walked away. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I saw him pause at the end of the driveway and turn back. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at my house. Then he walked to the side of the house, disappearing from the camera's view. My heart started pounding as I fast-forwarded the footage. About 10 minutes later, he reappeared, got into his car, and drove away. Who was this guy, and what the heck was he doing lurking around my house? The following evening, I was on edge. I'd decided not to accept any more deliveries, no matter what. When the doorbell rang again, I felt a surge of anxiety. Peering through the peephole, I saw the same driver standing there, another bag of food in his hands. This time, I didn't open the door. I watched him through the peephole, hoping he would just leave, but he didn't. He rang the bell again, then knocked. My heart was racing and my palms were sweaty. I felt trapped, not knowing what to do. After what felt like forever, he finally set the bag down and walked away. I waited, holding my breath, until I was sure he was gone. Then I checked the cameras again. Just like before, he lingered near the house, walking around the side where there were no cameras. This was no coincidence. It seemed like he was casing my home. The next morning, I went to the local police station that was closest to me. I told the officer at the desk about the deliveries and the driver's strange behavior. She took down my information and said they would look into it, but I could tell she thought it was just a misunderstanding or something. Feeling frustrated, I decided to contact Grubhub directly. I explained the situation to their customer service, but they assured me that all their drivers underwent background checks and that they would investigate the matter internally. It wasn't much comfort. That weekend, I had a security company come out and install additional cameras around the house, covering the blind spots. I also changed the locks, just in case. I was determined to protect myself, but the feeling of being watched just lingered. I told my friends about what was happening, and they offered their support. My best friend Emma even offered to stay with me for a few days, which I gladly accepted. Having someone else in the house made me feel a bit safer. With Emma there, I finally felt like I could relax a little, but the peace didn't last long. One night, we decided to watch a movie to take our minds off things. Halfway through, I got up to make some popcorn in the kitchen and noticed something odd on the counter tucked behind the back of the microwave. It was a small black device, no bigger than a matchbox. I picked it up, examining it closely. It had a small lens on one side. It was a hidden camera. My heart sank as I realized that someone had been watching me inside my own home. I called the police immediately, and they came to investigate. They searched the house thoroughly and found 2 more cameras, one in the living room and another in my bedroom. They collected the evidence and assured me they would do everything they could to find out who was responsible. Even with the extra security measures and the police involved, I couldn't stop feeling vulnerable. Every creak or weird noise made me jump, and I could barely sleep. Emma tried to comfort me, but the fear was overwhelming. One night, as I lay awake in bed, I heard a noise outside. It was a soft, shuffling sound like someone walking on gravel. I froze, straining to hear. The sound grew louder and closer. I reached for my phone, ready to call 911, when suddenly it stopped. The next day, I decided I couldn't live in fear any longer. I was going to confront this driver and find out what he wanted. I asked Emma to stay inside and watch the cameras while I waited outside at the time the deliveries usually came. Sure enough, around 8 p.m., the familiar red jacket appeared. He parked his car a little way down the street and walked towards my house with another bag of food. My heart was jumping out of my chest as I stepped out to meet him. "What do you want?" I demanded, standing my ground. He looked surprised but didn't say anything. Instead, he tried to hand me the bag. "Stop sending me food," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "And stop hanging around my house. I've called the police." For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me. Then, without a word, he turned around and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away as I stood there with my legs trembling. A few days later, I received a call from the police. They had identified the driver and brought him in for questioning. It turned out he wasn't a real Grubhub employee. He had been using a fake uniform and stolen bags to gain access to people's homes. He admitted to breaking in, planting the cameras, and sending the food as a way to study his targets before breaking in. The police found more evidence at his apartment, linking him to several other break-ins in the area. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of breaking and entering, burglary, and harassment. It took me a long time to feel safe again. I upgraded my security system even further and started attending self-defense classes. I never thought something like food being delivered to my house would change my life forever, but it did. It was a late Friday night and I was starving. I had spent the entire evening catching up on work, barely noticing the time. The kitchen was void of anything edible, and the thought of cooking was exhausting, so I did what any sensible person would do. I ordered food delivery. I live alone in a small, quiet neighborhood. It's the kind of place where you know your neighbors by name and everyone looks out for each other. I always felt safe there, which is probably why I let my guard down that night. The delivery app showed that the driver, Mark, was just a few minutes away. I felt a small sense of relief, anticipating the warm meal that would soon be in my hands. As the car pulled up, I noticed it was a beat-up sedan with dents and scratches, but I didn't think much of it. People work hard, and not everyone can afford a new car. When I opened the door, Mark stood there holding my food. He looked like an average guy in his early 30s with a scruffy beard and a worn-out baseball cap. He handed me the bag with a friendly smile, and I thanked him, ready to close the door and enjoy my dinner. "Excuse me," he said just as I was about to shut the door. "Do you mind if I use your bathroom? It's been a long shift and I really need to go." I felt slightly uncomfortable letting a stranger into my house, even just to use the bathroom. But I also didn't want to be rude. He seemed harmless enough, and it was just a quick trip to the bathroom. "Sure, it's right down the hall," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. He nodded gratefully and hurried past me. As I waited for him to finish, I started unpacking my food on the kitchen counter. I couldn't shake the weird feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. My eyes kept looking to the hallway, listening for any unusual sounds. Finally, he emerged from the hallway. "Thank you so much," he said with the same friendly smile. "I really appreciate it." "No problem," I replied, forcing a smile. "Have a good night." He nodded and left, closing the door behind him. I locked it immediately and double-checked to make sure it was secure. The uneasy feeling lingered, but I brushed it off, convincing myself I was being paranoid. Hours later, I suddenly woke up. My heart was pounding, and for a moment, I couldn't figure out why. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the back of the house. My first thought was that it was an animal, but the noise was too intentional. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The scratching continued, followed by a soft thud. It sounded like someone was trying to break in. Panic surged through me as I grabbed my phone and crept out of bed. I moved as quietly as possible, not wanting to alert whoever was outside. As I reached the living room, I peeked through the curtains. I was frozen with fear when I saw the silhouette of a man at the back door. It was Mark, the delivery driver. He was using a crowbar to try and force the door open. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, praying they would answer quickly. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice came through the line. Someone is trying to break into my house, I whispered urgently. It's the DoorDash delivery driver from earlier. He's at my back door right now. Stay on the line with me, the operator instructed. Police are on their way. Do you have a safe place to hide? I glanced around, trying to think. The basement. I could hide there until the police arrived. I moved as quietly as possible, making my way to the basement door. Just as I reached it, I heard the back door splinter and crack. He was getting in. I hurried down the basement stairs, quietly closing the door behind me. I huddled in a dark corner, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. The operator stayed on the line, reassuring me that help was on the way. I listened to the sounds of Mark moving through my house. I heard footsteps, drawers opening and closing, the sound of things being moved around. It sounded like he was searching for something. Suddenly, the basement door creaked open. My heart stopped. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't come down the stairs. I could hear his heavy breathing as he stood at the top, seemingly undecided whether or not to come down. The sound of sirens in the distance broke the tense silence. Mark cursed under his breath and slammed the door shut. I heard him run through the house, then the sound of the back door opening and closing again. The police arrived moments later. They found me in the basement, still clutching my phone, shaking and terrified. They searched the house and the surrounding area, but Mark was long gone. They took my statement and assured me they would do everything they could to find him. The days that followed were a blur of fear and anxiety. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting him to return. The police informed me that they had been patrolling the neighborhood, and my neighbors were all on high alert. Despite their efforts, Mark was never found. Eventually, I moved out of that house, unable to shake the memories of that night. I still get the creeps when I think about it, and I've never let my guard down since. I learned a hard lesson about trust and safety. Some people might call it paranoia, but I call it survival. To this day, I still have nightmares about that night. The thought of how easily things could have gone differently haunts me. I never order food delivery anymore. It's a small price to pay for peace of mind. I never expected my quiet evening to turn into a night of terror. It started just like any other Friday night. I had come home from work, looking forward to a relaxing weekend. My small house in the suburbs was my sanctuary, a place where I felt safe and at ease. But that sense of security was shattered by a single knock on the door. It was around 8 p.m. and I was in the middle of watching my favorite show when I heard the knock. It wasn't the usual soft knock I got from neighbors or friends. It was firm and deliberate. I paused the show and made my way to the door, wondering who it could be. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a man in a delivery uniform. He held a large brown paper bag that looked like it came from a local Chinese restaurant. The sight of the food made my stomach growl. I hadn't eaten dinner yet.
"Delivery for Sarah?"
he said, glancing down at a slip of paper. My name is not Sarah, so there must have been a mistake. I'm sorry, but I didn't order any food, and my name isn't Sarah, I replied, trying to keep my tone polite. The man frowned and checked the slip again.
"This is 152 Maple Street, right?"
Yes, but I didn't order anything, I repeated, feeling a slight nervousness creep in. He shrugged.
"Sometimes people order food for their friends or family. Maybe it's a surprise. It's already paid for."
That seemed possible. My sister had surprised me with food deliveries before. I decided to take the bag, thinking it might be a kind gesture from her. "Okay, thanks," I said, taking the bag from him. He gave me a strange smile before turning to leave. I closed the door and carried the bag to the kitchen. As I unpacked the food, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The food looked and smelled delicious, but there was no note or message. It was just food. I texted my sister to thank her, but she replied almost immediately, saying she hadn't sent anything. My anxiety grew stronger. If she didn't send it, then who did? I decided not to eat the food. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. I put the food in the fridge and tried to go back to my show, but my mind kept wandering back to the delivery guy and his strange smile. Several hours passed and I eventually went to bed, trying to convince myself that I was overthinking things. But I couldn't fall asleep. Every little noise in the house seemed amplified and my thoughts kept racing. The next morning, I woke up early, still feeling uneasy. I went to the kitchen to make coffee and saw the bag of food sitting in the fridge. I decided to throw it away, just to be safe. As I was about to toss it in the trash, I noticed something odd about the bag. There was a small tear in the side, and through it, I could see a piece of paper. I was definitely curious, so I pulled it out. It was a handwritten note, and what it said made me panic.
I've been watching you.
My heart pounded in my chest as I read the note over and over again. This was no ordinary delivery. Someone had gone through the trouble of pretending to deliver food just to leave this message. But why? I felt exposed and vulnerable. I immediately checked all the locks on my doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. Then I called the police. An officer arrived within the hour. I showed him the note and explained what had happened. He took it seriously and told me they would definitely look into it, but he also told me there wasn't much they could do without more information. For the next few days, I lived in a state of constant anxiety. Every time I left the house, I felt like I was being watched. A week after the fake delivery, I was coming home from work when I saw the same car parked near my house. It was the same make and model as before, and it filled me with fear. It was still daylight, so I decided to confront the driver. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I couldn't live in fear any longer. I parked my car and walked over to the other vehicle. As I approached, I saw a man sitting inside, staring at me. It was the same man who had delivered the food. My heart raced as I knocked on the car window. He rolled it down and I could see the same strange smile on his face.
Can I help you?
He asked, his voice calm and casual. Why are you watching me? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He chuckled softly.
I'm not watching you. I'm just taking a break.
From what? Delivering food? I shot back, my anger rising. He didn't answer. Instead, he started the car and drove away, leaving me standing there, trembling with fear and frustration. I went back inside, feeling more paranoid than ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The next day, I had security cameras installed around my house, hoping they would deter him or at least capture evidence if he tried anything. But the cameras only made me more anxious. I found myself constantly checking the footage, looking for any sign of him. I barely slept, and when I did, I would awake from nightmares filled with his strange smile and the note that had started it all. About a week later, I woke up to the sound of a notification on my phone. The camera had detected motion in my backyard. I opened the app and watched the live feed, my heart pounding in my chest. There he was, standing in my backyard, staring up at the camera with that same unnerving smile. He waved slowly, as if mocking me, before disappearing into the night. I called the police again and they came to investigate, but by the time they arrived, he was long gone. They found no signs of forced entry and the footage had not been recorded in my app for some reason. There was no evidence that he had been there at all. I felt like I was losing my mind. My once safe and comfortable home had become a prison of fear and paranoia. I didn't know what he wanted or why he was doing this to me, but I knew I couldn't live like this any longer. I decided to stay with my sister for a while, hoping that putting some distance between us would make him stop. But even as I packed my bags, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike again. A few days after moving in with my sister, I received a call from the police. They had caught him. Apparently, he had been stalking several women in the area, using the guise of a delivery driver to get close to them. One of his other victims had managed to get a clear picture of his license plate, and the police had tracked him down. When they searched his house, they found a collection of notes and photos. He had been watching me for weeks, taking pictures of me as I went about my daily life. The note in the delivery bag was just the beginning of his sick game. Knowing that he was behind bars brought some relief, but the fear and paranoia didn't disappear overnight. I eventually moved back into my house and slowly started to feel safe again, but the experience has changed me. I'm more cautious and more aware of my surroundings. I'll never take my safety for granted again.